All right, well, hello everyone and good afternoon. Welcome back from after lunch. I just want to say thank you so much to Dan Sperling and to Christian for putting together this wonderful convening. I have learned a lot over the past day, and well, I guess it's been about a day now so far, and I look forward to learning more this afternoon and to speaking with you a little bit about what's going on in California. I don't know if I have a ton of fantastic information about breaking down the silos, maybe more questions and things that we're thinking about as we go along, but let me jump right in. Okay, so California, as you all probably know, you've heard this from some of my other California colleagues, we like to think of ourselves as kind of a nation state. And that's because we have almost 40 million people in California. You can see here what our GDP is. We are the 6th largest global economy. Our greenhouse gas emissions are about 440 million metric tons, and the transportation sector is almost 40% of that. So in the same way that our German colleagues are thinking very much about how do you reduce the emissions from the transport sector, so are we in California, because we will not be able to get to our climate goals if we can't make those reductions. You can see here we have about 30 million cars and 1 million trucks, so we in California love our cars. And you can see the petroleum consumption here, and Sandy had that in her presentation by how many gallons a day. This shows you the annual gallons just from the last little bit. So Governor Brown, I always like to put this in my presentations because people sometimes ask, how are things in California? We know the United States is maybe changing their mind about what they might like to do. That is not so with Governor Brown. You can read here what he has said about climate change is unlike any other threat we humans face. It is subject to irreversible tipping points and vast unknowns. Combating climate change, the existential threat of our time, will take heroic effort on the part of many people and many nations. This is what he said in 2016. You have probably heard him say similar things in 2017, in 2018. He will continue to say this, and therefore we at the agencies and his appointees have our sleeves rolled up, and we're running as fast as we can to help put in place solutions to this. I just wanted to make this one point here about reducing our greenhouse gas emissions in California while growing our economy. So you can see that our GDP is that line, the green line on top with the triangles, and we are growing our GDP. You can see that our greenhouse gas emissions are the yellow line at the bottom with the circles. So we have been able to grow our economy while reducing emissions. And I think that's a really important point, and I think it's meaningful when it comes from the 6th largest economy in the world. This can be done. So here are the emissions in California by sector. And as I mentioned, the transportation sector is about 40% of the total greenhouse gas emissions in the state of California. And as Dan Sperling mentioned in his presentation yesterday, if you include refining and the other components that go along with transportation, that goes up over 50%. So it's just imperative that we are able to reduce the greenhouse gases that come from our transportation sector. You saw something very similar to this in Sandy Berg's slide presentation, but I just wanted to list out some of California's policy goals and objectives. As you know, we are going to reduce greenhouse gases to 40% below 1990 levels by 2030 and 80% below 1990 levels by 2050. And the way you get there is by putting in place a low carbon fuel standard, the zero emission vehicle mandate that Sandy talked about so eloquently this morning, by increasing transportation electrification, by making progress on our short-lived climate pollutants. And then we also have the Clean Air Act, so I should have kind of put that up there at the top. The Clean Air Act is requiring up to an 80% reduction in NOx by 2023. So for all of us who think that 2030 is really close, 2023 is even closer than that. And nitrogen oxides, as you all probably know, form smog in our atmosphere, and that causes all kinds of breathing problems, a lot of public health issues. And so getting this clean as quick as we can is also really important because it impacts people's health today. The reason we're looking at these zero emission solutions is because it gets the greenhouse gas reduction, and it also gets you those clean air benefits that we're looking for. And I am happy to share my slides with anyone who wants them. I know that I also talk kind of fast, so just shoot me an email or come find me. I will be happy to send those to you, and maybe the slides will be put up on the webpage as well. So you have heard here, Patrick mentioned in his introduction, Senate Bill 350 in California, and it's a Clean Energy and Pollution Reduction Act of 2015. And as he mentioned, that's doubling down on energy efficiency. It's putting together a 50% renewable portfolio standard. It calls for widespread transportation electrification. And these are some of the ways that we are going to get to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions 40% below 1990 levels in 2030. One of the things that I think is a unique component to California potentially is that we have this component where it asks us to figure out how do you increase the access to low-income communities to this clean energy revolution that we have going on. And it's really important because if we don't bring our low-income communities along, if we don't bring all of our communities along, we're also not going to get to where we need to be in 2030, in 2040, and in 2050. And so the legislature directed the Energy Commission to study the barriers to low-income communities having access to energy efficiency and renewable energy. And they directed our sister agency, the California Air Resources Board, to study the barriers to low-income communities getting involved in the transportation sector. And of course, there's a lot of cross-pollination with us and the information that we have there. But we're also looking specifically at how do you put in place solutions that ensure that the low-income communities come along with you, that they're part of this transition. So my next slide here is showing you what the energy efficiency in California looks like. We're really proud of this. We have managed to put in place building standards, appliance standards, other types of efficiency standards where you can see in the United States per capita has continued to grow, whereas California has managed to stay essentially flat. I'm gonna call it flat because we're proud of that. And this is a really important component. When we're thinking about the silos and breaking down the silos, one of the things that's an important consideration that we don't have an answer to, but we do have questions, is what happens when we're driving down the energy use in buildings with these energy efficiency measures that we're putting in place? That's really important. And at the same time, I am asking you to bring in a whole bunch of chargers and add a bunch of load to your building, which then brings right back up the amount of energy that your building uses, right? And how do you make sure that you don't put in place something that's trying to make your building more efficient, but then accidentally cuts out the transportation electrification component? And when you put the transportation electrification component in, how do you make sure you're not dinging the building owners for their energy use going up instead of staying flat or coming down? So we're still working on that, but that's one place where the energy sector and the transportation sector are coming together in California. And then next, we're looking at our renewable energy generation in California. So this chart, the screen is really big, which is fantastic. So hopefully you can see the letters and the numbers from the back here. But this shows you about how much renewable energy generation we have in California. We're at about 30% of the renewable portfolio standard today. We're aiming to be at 33% by 2020. We will certainly meet and surpass that goal. And as I mentioned, we're going to 50% in 2030. There are bills in front of our California state legislature to increase that or to pull some of those dates forward. There's a whole bunch of them, and none of them has made it all the way through the legislative process. So hopefully when we do our second annual one of these next year, I'll have some more information to report to you on what's happening there. And this is another place where we're thinking very much about how do you integrate electric vehicles, and in this case I'm talking about both your plug-in electric vehicles and also your fuel cell electric vehicles into our renewable system. In California, actually what's going on right now with this solar production that you can see here, we have too much energy in the middle of the day when the sun is shining. And so what we need to do is plug in electric vehicles in the middle of the day, and that kind of turns your traditional energy information on its head, right? Usually you want people not to plug in the middle of the day. We would like people to plug their electric vehicles in the middle of the day so that they're soaking up some of this additional solar and wind that's on the system in the middle of the day when the sun is shining. We can also use that energy to run an electrolyzer and make hydrogen fuel, right? So that's renewable hydrogen fuel that can then go into the transportation sector. And so these are ways, again, where our renewable sector and our transportation sector are coming together. And we're really just getting going on what that's gonna look like in the future, but that's another place where we're breaking down silos and need to figure out how all of this comes together. So I just want to tell you a little bit about the California Energy Commission, who we are and what we do, because even people outside of California don't really know who we are and what we do. So we are the state's primary energy planning and permitting agency, and we have a whole bunch of things that we do with energy in our bailiwick. So anything that is 50 megawatts or bigger, that's thermal. So something like a natural gas-fired power plant or a solar thermal plant, not PV, and that's just a quirk of the way the law got set up, are things that the Energy Commission does all of the environmental reviews for. We are working on, let's see, so the energy efficiency like I talked about. We do appliance standards, we do building standards, and we forecast future energy needs for the state. And that's kind of an important component of what we do as well, because the other agencies base the Public Utilities Commission, for example, says how much energy the investor-owned utilities are allowed to procure. They do that based on the forecast that the Energy Commission puts together. So we work hand in hand with our agencies, sister agencies across the state on these types of things. So this is the mission of the Energy Commission. And what I oversee at the commission is our Alternative and Renewable Fuel and Vehicle Technology Program. The acronym for that is ARFVTP, which is not any better than the long name of the program. Very bureaucratic, but it's a great program. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what that program does. So this program is set up here. It's mostly focused on climate change policies. It was reauthorized in 2013. It will sunset on January 1st of 2024 unless we have another conversation with the legislature kind of in the mid or early 2020s about whether to reauthorize that program. And what it does is it puts a $3 fee on your vehicle registration. So in California, you go to the Department of Motor Vehicles, you have to register your car every year. Well, they send you, after you go the first time, they just send it to you in the mail, and you just get to put the check in the mail. But it's got a $3 fee on it, and that raises up to $100 million that comes to the Energy Commission every year to invest in transforming transportation. So this is just one way to think of how to potentially raise money to put back into the transportation system. So that's, whoops, one more. There we go. That's where this comes from. It also has, it asks us to do some complementary state goals, and those include improving air quality, increasing alternative fuel use, reducing our dependence on petroleum, and promoting economic development. So, easy for us to get going on. So this program, as I mentioned, raises up to $100 million to invest in transforming transportation each year. And because of that broad mandate, what we do typically is put this into a portfolio approach. So some of it is going into low carbon biofuel production and supply. Some of it is going into the alternative fuel infrastructure, and I'll talk to you about that in a little more detail in just a minute. Some of that goes into advanced vehicle technologies, which is also very exciting. Some of the intelligent transportation system thing that Lou mentioned in his presentation, where we put out competitive solicitations to try to get more information on that. How do you move goods in a much smarter way? And then we kind of catch some related opportunities and needs. We're helping the local cities around California plan for what does it look like if your city is electrified. Where would you want to put your charging infrastructure? So we'll give money to cities to help plan for that type of thing. And then one of the things that I'm really excited about is now we've got a charging challenge, and the cities can compete with each other to put together the best plan. And so they kind of do a pre-plan, and we'll fund some of those. And then the ones that we fund, of the plans, they will compete against each other with their plans, and we will give them money to implement the plan that they put in place. So we'll give a little bit of money to kind of get people excited, get them planning. Those plans will then go head-to-head with each other in a second round to try to win money to implement the infrastructure. Because I'm trying to think about how do we get this beyond just planning for this type of thing, but actually have infrastructure in the ground. And so that's what we'll be doing on charging. And so that's kind of what the regional readiness talks about. The workforce training component, I think, is really important. We've heard about that yesterday in terms of labor and making sure that people are prepared for the jobs that we have of the future. So we might not pay for your entire schooling on a community college, but if you want to take a class in your electricians to learn about how do I service a charging infrastructure, you want to take a class to learn about how do I work on a fuel cell vehicle when it comes in to the Toyota shop or the Honda shop, we'll pay for that extra course so that people are then prepared to work on our technologies of, the technologies of today, really. I shouldn't say technologies of the future. Oops, I had my timer going to make sure I didn't go too long. Okay, there we go. Um, so let's see. This just gives you kind of a sense of, the program has been up and running for about 10 years, so we have had the opportunity to invest $250 million in transforming transportation in California to date. Again, the legislature directed us to put it in that broad portfolio, so that's kind of where you see the different breakdowns here. I can tell you when the legislature 10 years ago put this program in place, we were looking at propane and at natural gas as options for replacing diesel. We don't fund propane anymore, and we're shifting away from funding natural gas because we're looking more towards the zero emission solutions. So the program has the flexibility to change as times change and as the technologies change, to make sure that we're always kind of pushing the envelope and making sure that we're accelerating that transition to a cleaner transportation system. But this just gives you kind of an overview of what we have funded so far. And then I wanted to talk to you about the infrastructure network, because we have talked a lot about how do we build the foundation for this transition. I'm really excited that we are helping to fund the infrastructure, because one of the things that you've all heard also, I think, as a theme during this conference is sort of the urgency, not sort of the urgency that we need to work with in order to help protect people's health today and help try to stay under 2 for our greenhouse gases. And to do that, we have to move much more urgently than we typically move in the transportation sector. So the Energy Commission is really helping to try to accelerate the infrastructure into this space so that it's an easy choice for people. They don't have to say, where do I charge up? Oh, there's already a charger there. You don't need to worry. So you can see here we've put about $80 million in about 9,000 electric vehicle chargers. California has about 14,000 chargers right now, so the Commission has funded more than half of the infrastructure that we have in California today. And then the slide kind of shows you the breakdown between the residential, the publicly owned, the corridor chargers, and fleet and workplaces. So in California, people love to drive between Northern California and Southern California, between Northern California and Tahoe, all kinds of different places. So that's what the corridors are, right? Making sure that you can kind of drive all around the state and be able to be connected. This $80 million has leveraged another $44 million in match funding. And you can see here how much of the charging ecosystem has gone into the manufacturing, workforce training, and planning. So this is what we're doing. We're really helping to build out the foundation for the network that we need in California to make this transition. And this is on the light duty side, for light duty vehicles to be zero emission. We also are working on building hydrogen refueling stations in California. I think Californians love their cars. They love them for different reasons. They love them for different things that they can do or that they think they might want to do someday. A hydrogen fuel cell car gives you the ability to fuel up in 5 minutes, just like you do with your gasoline car. You can, and then you've got 300 to 400 miles of range before you have to think about that again. So it's very similar to the model that people are used to. So if people don't want to make a change, but they do want a zero-emission vehicle, then you've got your hydrogen fuel cell. The legislature has directed the Energy Commission to invest in an initial network of about 100 hydrogen refueling stations. And it's interesting because the legislature, while wanting very much to make this push, was also a little skeptical. They weren't sure, how's this going to go? And so they direct the Air Resources Board every June reports on how many fuel cell electric cars there are on the roads in California. And every December, the Energy Commission reports on how the infrastructure is coming along, how expensive is it, are the costs coming down? And so that it gives the legislature some checkpoints to feel comfortable with us making this investment of state dollars. So it's just a really nice checkpoint. O&M is operations and maintenance. And then I want to point out that it's the CDFA, which is the California Department of Food and Ag. So sorry for the acronym there. But what they do is they have a division of weights and measures. And so what they do is make sure, really on anything that gets weighed or measured. But for hydrogen, if you think that you are getting a kilogram of hydrogen, you actually are getting a kilogram of hydrogen. So that the Energy Commission helped fund the component of the Department of Food and Ag's work to make that happen. So, you know, kind of the different pieces that you need to put in place to really build this infrastructure and make it work, we're also helping to do. do. You can see here that we funded 64 stations. 31 of those stations are open retail. We're excited about that in California because that means, like I was describing, you can literally drive up, run your credit card through, put the hydrogen fuel in your car, close back up the cap, and off you go. You don't need any special equipment. You don't need a special key card. It's just open retail. So it's very simple for the hydrogen fuel cell users. And I just wanted to tell a little story about our emerging network in California. So this is me with Tyson Eckerly from the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, and also with Mary Nichols, who is the chairwoman of the Air Resources Board. And you can see our little emoticons there. That's me in my fuel cell electric vehicle and Mary Nichols in her fuel cell electric vehicle. And we had a great time. This was in April of 2016, so this was a couple of years ago now. I will say that at that point in time, California only had 17 hydrogen refueling stations, but you could drive from Los Angeles up to Sacramento in a little bit under 8 hours, and I know because we did it. And it was a really, really fun day. We fueled up in Santa Monica. We all kind of caravanned up the road. Everybody kind of swapped out. We were driving in between Hyundai Tucsons and Toyota Mirais. And then there's a place called Coalinga that we stopped. It's right in the middle of the state on the I-5. So you have to drive on the Interstate 5. So Lou is right. We do just throw out highway numbers. But that's one of the big connectors between Northern California and Southern California. Stopped there. We had lunch. We filled up the cars. It took us longer to eat lunch than it took to fill up all 6 of the cars that we had, because you really can do back-to-back fills in under 5 minutes. And then we drove the rest of the way to Sacramento. Sacramento is the capital of California, so when we got there, we had a little party with tequila and tacos, and we invited the legislature to come. And when they came, we told them what we had been doing during the day. So they could see the cars, they could know that you actually can fill them up. The cars are actually here, and you can get from one end of California to the other. So that was Mary's Valley Rally. We did that in 2016. Then we went around the San Francisco Bay Area last year in April as well. So again, Mary and Tyson and myself. And you can see the 4 cities that we went to. I don't know if those of you who know California, I'm chagrined to note that that took the same amount of time as driving from Southern California to Northern California, just because of the traffic there. But it still was just a really fun day, and it was just a way to show that the Bay Area is connected. And if you live in that area and you're not too far from one of the stations, you can buy this type of car. It's there, it's real, it's ready to go. So this was just something that we wanted to do to make sure that people know, that they know this, and that this transition is not just coming, it's already here. So that was what we had done on those days. And I just kind of wanted to tell the story about that because it really was a lot of fun. And it was great to have the legislators come and talk to us at the one where we did our tacos and tequila, because most folks haven't seen this transition on hydrogen fuel cells. They think, oh, that's 10 years away, it's experimental, we don't know when it's coming. And so we were able to just point out the cars, talk about how we had filled them up, and really give people a real and concrete example of how we're making this transition. Okay, so I'm going to switch back again to my Alternative and Renewable Fuel and Vehicle Technology Program, or ARFVTP, and the benefits, and just talk to you a little bit about the benefits that are anticipated by 2025. This is just with the projects where you can measure that type of thing. So for workforce training, for example, obviously you're not displacing any petroleum, right? So we didn't count that as we were rolling out the metrics for this program. But it's going to be about 243 million gallons of petroleum displaced. We think we're going to reduce about 2 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent annually. Reducing some NOx and some PM, which is great for air quality. And then you can see here some of the workforce training numbers. We've been able to provide training for over 17,000 workers in California so that they can learn how to work on these clean transportation technologies. And so anytime, and the reason I added this in here as well is because anytime you set up a program like this where you're bringing in dollars from a vehicle registration fee, you want to be able to show clearly that you're getting benefits back to the folks who are helping apply for this. And I also just want to mention that I am super focused on road transportation for that exact reason. It's coming from a vehicle registration fee. The legislature likes to see those dollars go right back into the on-road sector. But I fully recognize that there are many other solutions in this space with biking, designing cities in a better way, and that there's other vehicles, right? Agricultural equipment, mining equipment, construction equipment that we also need to cover, but this program is focused in this space. Here's some examples of some of the projects that we have funded. We worked with the Department of the Navy for all of their non-tactical vehicles in California. They transitioned them from and this goes into the lead by example. They transitioned them from internal combustion engines to all electric vehicles. Now the trick here is, I don't know how the military is here in Germany. The military in the US is a lot of 18, 19-year-old boys, and they like fast, splashy looking cars. So the problem here is that this is not a splashy looking car. I'm sorry to my friends in Ford. It's just, you know, it's a solid looking sedan. So we got to figure out how to get them to be excited about driving these cars, getting into these cars. Next to this is anaerobic digestion project that the Energy Commission has put together. So it's trash pickup. The vehicles go around the neighborhood, they pick up the trash, it goes in the anaerobic digester, it makes renewable natural gas, which then goes back into the natural gas garbage truck that's going around the community. So this is another way where your natural gas sector is coming together with your transportation sector. And maybe I won't go through all of these projects because I'm mindful of my time, but we're working with BYD to bring port equipment. So that's a cargo handling truck that's going around the port. We got to figure out how to clean up vehicles at the ports. This beautiful blue slash here is First Element's hydrogen refueling station. So there are about 20 of those around the state. That's what they look like. They're really great. In the United States, Congresswoman Maxine Waters is just amazing. She is really fierce. She is a great advocate for the people. She came when we were taking out diesel engines and putting in electric engines into these G-Trans buses, and I got a photo with her, so I put that in all my presentations just because, you know, she's fierce, she's awesome, I want to be like her. And then you see some more port equipment. That's a yard hostler that's also electrified. So in California, I think Sandy went through some of these numbers with you. We've got about 360,000 electric vehicles on the road. This shows you the US sales. It tells you how many charging stations we have, and these numbers are from October, so they're a little bit out of date. We have 31 hydrogen stations and more than 42 models. And every month it's an organization called VELOS. They're working to do public education and outreach to make sure that people know that this information is here. So every month they update this data. It's VELOZ, velos.org. So you can always look on there to see what the latest stats are in California. And then I just want to pivot to the announcement that you have heard Dan Sperling mention yesterday. Sandy mentioned it as well. I'm going to mention it too because it's really exciting. And this is made possible in part by California's Cap and Trade program and by the Energy Commission's Alternative and Renewable Fuel and Vehicle Technology program. So this shows you what the Cap and Trade, just kind of a little bit about what it is and what outcomes we are trying to get from it. And so I'm just going to skip through that really quickly. Again, I'm happy to share the slides or talk in more detail about cap and trade offline. But what Governor Brown did on last Friday, it hasn't even been a week yet, so it's very exciting. He boldly increased the funding for ZEV infrastructure fivefold and also said we are going to get to 5 million electric vehicles by 2030. So where we were before that, we were aiming for 1 million vehicles by 2020. 1.5 million electric vehicles by 2025, and now we're going to 5 million electric vehicles by 2030. This tracks really nicely, actually, with where we need to be if we're going to meet our climate change goals. And as you know, we have our work cut out for us. Our sleeves are rolled up. We are working hard to figure out how do we accelerate these cars and the infrastructure to support them into the market, because 360,000 to 5 million in 12 years is enough to keep me awake at night. So that's something that we are working very hard on. I'm also really excited that there's $235 million in our 18-19 budget for our fiscal year 18-19 budget for the ZEV infrastructure. The infrastructure in California is a little bit behind the vehicles, and that's because to date we've been putting tens of millions into the infrastructure, but hundreds of millions into the vehicles. So in order for the infrastructure to keep pace with the vehicles and people not to have to worry about where am I going to fuel up or where am I going to charge up, we've got to increase those investments. And the reason I think it's important for California and others to be in the lead here is because we're trying to move this really fast. And I don't know how you do that without incentives, without the state leading the way, without the state showing its commitment. We really strongly anticipate, as I mentioned, we had put $80 million into the charging infrastructure, which leveraged $44 million of private investment, that the investments that the state is making in this space will also leverage private investment. And that's really exciting. We're going to need that to get where we need to be. But it's great. His executive order that he announced on Friday has 200 hydrogen refueling stations by 2025, 250,000 charging stations by 2025, and about 10,000 of those we anticipate will be DC fast chargers, and then at least 5 million zero-emission vehicles, and we say zero-emission vehicles because that includes the plug-in hybrids, the battery electrics, and also the fuel cell electric vehicles. So that is kind of the latest, hot off the press, not even a week old. We still have to figure out of that $235 million, how much of that goes into the charging infrastructure, how much of that goes into the hydrogen infrastructure, right? What does that breakdown look like? We'll be, hopefully my team is working on that while I'm here and they can present something to me when I get back next week. But we're moving on this. It's really exciting. Some of our strategies for moving ahead is to continue to build partnerships in this space, right? We can't do this all by ourselves. We need folks like the Navy to help us transform fleets and demonstrate that you can get this done. And it's their non-tactical fleet, not the ones that they use when they're overseas and things like that. We need to continue to invest in our transformative change. We want to spur innovation, and we want to increase access. We want to make sure that everyone can be part of this. And it's important to stay on the cutting edge. And so this comes back to our theme of the silos. We want to understand how our electric system, our transport system, and our natural gas system can best fit together, right? How do they complement one another as we decarbonize and help us to decarbonize faster? And I don't have, as I mentioned, a lot of great answers on that, but we are funding research into this space. We are doing some pilot projects. We're looking at vehicle grid integration. We're bringing in experts from all around the world to learn what they're doing and think about what do we need to do as we go forward. But I think California is so on the cutting edge of this that some of it you just kind of have to do your best and then maybe make it up as you go along is not quite right, but right, bring your best expertise and see what you can put in place to really help make this transition and think about how do these systems work together in a way that helps us decarbonize faster than we would if each one was trying to do it separately. And then last, because we're here, and there may be some folks that are in the room that are not part of the ZEV Alliance, but they should be. So I just wanted to make sure that you have a chance to think about that. I can put you in touch with folks who can get you signed up for that. The ZEV Alliance, our goal is to have 100% of all vehicles sold by 2050 be zero-emission vehicles. This is something we set for ourselves a few years ago. It might be worth bringing the ZEV Alliance together to think about, do we want to put something more aggressive in place given all of the different announcements that have been made kind of between now and then. But I would be remiss to come to talk with an international audience and not raise this. And that's it. That's me. This is my email address. So if you would like to have my slides, because I know I talk fast and went through a lot of information, I'm happy to send them to you. And I believe that they're going to get put on the conference webpage as well. So thank you so much for inviting me to be here. I'm delighted to get to address this group.